Welcome back to the Friday Show, brought to you by Woodbine. We are just a couple of weeks away from King's Plate Day at Woodbine, the biggest day of the year up there. I'm really looking forward to going. I haven't been to Woodbine since the pandemic, so I'm looking forward to a big weekend of racing and the King's Plate itself on August 20th. I'm Ray Paulick, joined by our editor-in-chief, Natalie Voss, who is in Saratoga. I'm in Del Mar. This is the show. We could have an argument about which is better, Natalie. What do you think?
We could, and I mean, I'm sitting in Saratoga, so obviously I am pro East Coast here. So this could be a longer Friday show. Actually, we could just take a left-hand turn with the topic.
Well, we're not gonna debate that because it's clear that Saratoga is second best to Del Mar. We are going to talk about the completion of a 3-year saga that started in March of 2020 with the arrest of, I believe, 27 individuals by the FBI after an investigation by the Southern District of New York, federal agency, Five Stones, which was brought into the picture beforehand by the Jockey Club and Jeff Garral at Meadowlands. And the recent sentencing of Jason Servis to 4 years in prison for a felony and a misdemeanor of misbranding drugs. That pretty much concludes it. Everybody else has either pleaded guilty or has been convicted. I think there might have been one or two of the original people that were indicted that the charges were dropped, but nobody got off as far as anybody that, the serious charges. There's a lot of jail time involved, and I think that without this investigation, I'm not so sure that HISA would have passed in Congress later that year. And so I'd say that that's probably the biggest change that's come out of it. But Natalie, what are some of the things that stand out in your mind as you look back at the last 3+ years of this investigation? You've gone through a ton of court records and transcripts and that. What are some things that stand out?
I think probably the first thing that stood out when I was, especially really just that first day reading the indictment, was that there were, I knew as I was reading it, there's going to be a lot of people, especially in the horse player community, who are going to read about some of the substances that Navarro and Servis were using and say, I told you so. And in fact, there were. But I think that the indictments were kind of a good example of it took the FBI to catch these guys because drug testing did not catch them. On the ground, investigators and security did not catch them. And we saw several examples in the wiretaps of Navarro in particular talking to Servis about, being friends with unnamed racetrack investigators or security personnel who assisted them in making sure that they were not going to get caught. Really everything that we know about this case, at least what's been divulged in the public-facing version of the file, is because the FBI got wiretaps, and that was really the only way to make this work for a lot of different reasons. And it's certainly been very eye-opening reading some of those transcripts.
Yeah, one of the things that kind of caught me off guard in the beginning, and as I read some of the transcripts, is that there was really a brotherhood, of fellowship of cheaters. And it started with, I think, Navarro and Servis. They shared secrets. They shared drugs. They offered advice on how to use them, how they were using them, what horses were getting them, including some very big name horses. And you could say the same thing for some of the other people involved. Dr. Christian Ryan, the veterinarian, was involved with multiple trainers. It's something that I would have thought that cheaters would kind of keep to themselves, but it was a little bit of a shock to see how kind of blatantly they talked about it.
Yeah, and it seems, just sort of reading the mood on some of those wiretaps, they seem to be kind of okay with knowing that somebody else, or at least Servis seemed to be okay with knowing somebody else is doing something differently, because I guess it makes sense as a horse trainer, you would have to have some confidence in your individual approach being better than the next guy's. That's a lot of horse racing, right? Parimutuel wagering is kind of based on that concept of you're going to do what you're doing over there and I'm going to do what I'm doing. And I might know what you're doing, but I still think that my way is going to work out better. Navarro, sort of by contrast, you can see asking people, different people in various times, like, well, if you hear of anything else that I can start using, then, let me know. I want to hear about it. Or so-and-so's got some new thing that's supposed to do X. And, he seemed to very much be taking the kitchen sink approach to doping his horses. Of just anything he could find, he was going to try it. But some of the other guys seemed like they had their programs and they were interested in knowing what somebody else was doing, but not necessarily always going to jump on that bandwagon, which it was kind of interesting.
In the case of Jorge Navarro, he had it down to a science. He was giving advice on how to give EPO to, or not how when to give it, but when you can get caught in drug testing. And I don't know if that means that he had his own horses tested to find out when the EPO would leave the system, or maybe, as you suggested to me in a conversation recently, maybe it wasn't really EPO and that's why it didn't test. But there were other drugs involved, clenbuterol, for example, that Jason Servis used, and he talked about the regular, which was assuming that's Ventapulmin, which is the drug that is approved for use in horses, but now it's not approved for use in horses for quite a while before a race. It's amazing how this particular drug started out as you could give it up to basically race day, I think, when it first was approved, and now it's now you have to go on the vets list and you have to test clean after coming off the vets list before you can race or train. But he apparently was giving it like hay, oats, and water. And then there was a second clenbuterol, which he got from Jorge Navarro. And it didn't really went into a lot of detail about it, but I've heard of different concoctions of compounded clenbuterol that was, sometimes it's a powder they mix with water. Sometimes it's just in a gallon jug. But none of these horses that were getting it tested positive for clenbuterol, as far as I know, with Jason Servis, which is really kind of shocking.
Yeah, and we have no way to know if the jurisdictions he was running in were not testing to a fine enough point that they would have caught it, or like you mentioned, these guys. What's kind of astounding to me about all of this is that these guys didn't really know what any of this stuff was. They knew what the person who sold it to them told them that it was, but since a lot of it wasn't FDA approved and they knew that, they realized that it wasn't being made in a setting where there was going to be any verification of what's actually in there and what it's supposed to do and what's not in there in terms of purification. So what kind of I sort of made a face as you were saying Navarro had it down to a science. And the reason that I did that is because I've been reading, all the stuff that he was giving to horses and thinking, how would you begin to know if something was actually working or not when you're throwing 5 or 6 different things at a bunch of horses with different levels of talent, different levels of medical situations, training programs, whatever. He was just kind of trying everything he could, and then he would get really confident in something, and you could see that in the wiretaps, but he didn't really have any way to know because he had so many different things going on, presumably different batches of some of the same substances that he was using regularly also that might have some inconsistencies. And honestly, he didn't really know what was working and what wasn't. He just sort of developed an idea and then passed that along to other people. And apparently that was good enough for some of them to begin using it. But that's not really the same thing as having some sort of validated scientific approach to what you're doing.
Well, whatever he was doing was working somehow, because right. He was winning races at Monmouth Park, for example, at a 40% rate. And Jason Servis was right there with him, and they would even talk to each other about it. With Navarro saying to Servis, "You're killing it," and Servis talking to his assistant at one point saying, "Hey, we're winning too much. We've got to be careful." And I think maybe at that point he knew that he was under investigation, and that is something that surprised me. Even when they knew they were under investigation, I think they continued to cheat, which is just amazing to me.
Yeah, you see several examples of Navarro telling people at the end of phone calls, like, I don't want to talk about this on the phone, after he's already talked about whatever it is on the phone. I mean, they're clearly, I guess they don't catch the smart ones, but there wasn't a lot of real attempts to hide what he was doing. And I thought that the pre-sentencing memo from Servis's lawyers were kind of interesting because they did a really good job in some, they were doing their job to try to make him look as sympathetic as possible. And no, his veterinarian had him using this stuff and he didn't realize there was a problem. And then they get to the section of the pre-sentencing memo where they have to say, now, he did keep using SGF 1000 after the state specifically told him not to, but here's why it's not a problem. And I just thought, if you have to write that, you're already in some trouble. But that was an element of it too. The State Gaming Commission, in the case of SGF, put out an advisory saying, hey, this specific product, as well as some others, are not legal, and we do not want you using it. And they obviously continued to do that anyway, and just sort of, they had whatever their rationale was, and it was because they just wanted to keep winning.
Well, and it should be noted, they kept using it and they kept billing it as acupuncture or some other kind of treatments, because if you're not guilty, if you're not cheating, then you shouldn't have to lie about what you're doing to your horses to the owners. And Jason Servis was doing that, and God knows what Navarro was putting on his invoices, because maybe he just wrote kitchen sink and $500, because that's basically, I think, what his horses were getting, was everything. Red acid, blockers, the clenbuterol, EPO. I mean, this guy, you hear some people wear it on their sleeve, right? You know who they are. Jorge actually wore it on his feet. He had those Crocs with the Juiceman logo on it. I mean, I think if we got into we could probably sell those and make some money. The Juiceman line of Crocs would be great. Maybe he's wearing those in prison.
I mean, one can only hope, but I think that was certainly one of the photos. I believe that was in the pre-sentencing report. The defense had turned in their, playing the violins and don't send him to jail for too long. And then I think, as I recall, the prosecutors came back and just had a photo inside the document of the Crocs of like, this is what we're dealing with. I just saw that and was like, is this real? Like, it's crazy. And they said he had that in his tack room. I mean, people must have seen that. Lots of people would have seen that. If I'm recalling that detail correctly, it was not in his private home, I don't think. I think that those were just hanging out in the barn somewhere.
Well, for those who don't recall, the nickname came from a video that was filmed at Monmouth Park, where Navarro and one of his owners, Randall Gindy, I think his name, were celebrating a win by Navarro's brother at Gulfstream Park, and Gindy called him the Juice Man, the vegetable juice, and it's a nickname that stuck, and I think he wore it kind of proudly, actually. So we've gotten rid of all of the cheaters in the game now. Do you feel pretty confident that this investigation took care of everything, or do you think it had an impact on others to maybe start using Telegram or some of the WhatsApp or things that maybe they can hide so that the FBI can't wiretap them, or do you really think it made a difference in cleaning up the game to some degree?
I think it's hard to say. I mean, I remember for months or possibly even years after this indictment, like you and I were both hearing from people saying, oh, there's going to be more. There's going to be more. They're still looking at it. They're still wiretapping. There's going to be more people going down. And I actually haven't had anybody say that to me. And I think it's like a record. It's probably been like 6 months or so. And I don't know if that was ever actually happening, but there was a concern or a hope, depending on who you are, for a while there, that this was not going to be sort of a one-off, that there was going to be continued interest in enforcing these regulations, these FDA regulations on trainers. And it must have been very costly, this operation, I would think. They were wiretapping guys for a very long time. I mean, I don't even remember how many gigs of data we were told was having to be transferred in the evidentiary sharing process of this case, but it was insane how much tape they had and search warrant results that they had in here. So it was a resource intensive case. And I don't know if people are going to continue to be scared if this doesn't continue to come into federal courts. And I don't know whether I think the feds are going to keep being interested in this or not. I would hope so. I would hope this isn't kind of the very end, because I kind of suspect there are still people out there using non-FDA approved products. I mean, we see them getting advertised to horsemen still all the time. And it'll be clear as day that something is not, following the federal guidelines, and yet people are obviously buying it. So I think that the behavior is continuing. Whether or not I think people have permanently changed their behavior in any way as a result of the prosecution. I'm not sure, because it's 3 years ago now when everyone kind of had their cages rattled by that. So I'm not sure. I would hope so, but I'm skeptical.
One thing that quickly emerged in my mind when the indictments came out was that some of the people have been on our radar for a long time, and some of the companies that were selling these things have been on our radar for a while. And I'm afraid that there are many other companies out there doing similar things as far as producing compounded drugs that don't test, and that's a real problem. So I'm hoping that with the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority and the Highwoo affiliate that is the testing and enforcement agency, some of these compounded products that contain performance enhancing substances in them will be sort of driven out of here, because I think that's really been a problem, the compounders.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that if nothing else, they seem to be taking, or at least attempting, a national approach at saying, you're not even allowed to possess that stuff. Never mind whether we can test for it or not. If we find something in your barn that's not FDA approved, that is a violation. And there are some states where that was already true, but I'm not sure how broadly it was being enforced. And I'm not sure if that was true everywhere. But it's frustrating to me as somebody who's been, writing about a couple of the companies that were actually on the indictment. I wrote about years before they were indicted in this case. And so I feel like for years I've been telling people, like, there are hallmarks to a product that will tell you if it's okay or not. And you need to be paying attention to that, because we can see conversations in some of these wiretaps between different people in the Medivet company that made SGF 1000 talking about, well, how can we sort of make sure the FDA doesn't notice that what we're doing is not approved by them? We can label it a supplement when it's an injectable product and it's clearly not a supplement. We can say that it's for testing purposes instead of admitting that it's for administration purposes to an animal. We can change how we market it to make the words sound a little less bold or intimidating or boastful. And then, the FDA won't be concerned that this is actually a drug. They might think that it's a supplement that they're not really authorized to regulate. And I sort of feel like I've been saying a lot of these things for a while of, like, guys, think about how something is presented to you. There are certain things you can look for on packaging. There's certain things you should be aware of in marketing that will tell you if something's okay or not. And there is enormous risk, not just legally, but medically, in taking on something that isn't. And I think we've seen in the wiretaps examples of that too. Not only are these guys wiretapped because they're in federal court, they're talking about horses having negative reactions to stuff and dying in some cases. Like, it's not just sort of semantics with the FDA. This actually really matters. So watching some of that play out in the wiretaps as somebody who's been reporting on that type of regulation for a long time was incredibly frustrating. But I'm hoping that the national system, being more attuned to that and being a lot more militant about that, will ultimately discourage people from using stuff that really isn't safe.
Yeah. Well, you'd mentioned the fact that we kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, more people to be indicted. And that in that volume of information, they have customer lists of veterinarians and some of these compounders. And in fact, there was one wiretap conversation with Navarro and an owner in California, with the owner saying, is this horse getting everything? Is he getting, and, there was no follow-up on that. So in some regards, it's really disappointing that they didn't go to the next level and use the customer lists and press the people who were buying this stuff, because if they were buying it, they were using it. And, from that standpoint, it's disappointing. On the other hand, without the FBI, without Five Stones, without the support of Five Stones with the Jockey Club and Jeff Gurrell, I don't think we'd be in a different place today than we were 4 years ago. We would still have state-by-state regulations. We'd have some laboratories that are not capable of finding things. We'd have some racing commissions that have really bad contracts with the labs to where they're not spending enough money to actually catch anything. And we'd still have 40% trainers, just winning races and nobody questioning it. So, it's not all perfect, but I think in the end, it's been a really good thing for the industry that this had to happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hopeful that something positive comes out of it, whether it's via HISA, HIWU's regulation, or anything. And we sort of, our whole premise as a publication is that you can't fix problems if you don't point them out, and I'm hoping that this will sort of be a really big moment to push people to continue to make things better, because it can never go on the way that it was.
Well, Natalie, thanks a lot. You've spent I don't know how many hours going over court records, and I'm sure from that standpoint you're kind of glad it's over.
I am so thankful that my relationship with Pacer, which is the name of the document management system for federal cases, is hopefully come to an end. It was a 3-year bad relationship, and I'm happy to break up with them if I'm lucky enough to do so. But we'll see. I might have to be in there for some other purpose at some point. But man, I will not miss Pacer.
Well, thank you for your outstanding reporting on this subject over the last 3+ years, and we'll see what happens next with HISA, HIWU, and the Juiceman when he gets out of jail. I'm hoping he's not back in the game. I hope none of those guys are.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's edition of the Friday Show, brought to you by Woodbine. We'll see you next week.
Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Paulick Report insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Paulick Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Paulick Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Paulick Report and become a Paulick Report insider today.